Everyone, I'm with Coach Matt right now, and we're going to do the movement of the month. We're over at CrossFit Terminus in the Old Fourth Ward in Atlanta, Georgia. And what we're going to be doing is just going through some strategies. Matt, he was a collegiate athlete. He went with Georgetown. He's done multiple races. He did the Leadville 100. He's paced people for different marathons, ultra marathons. You know, he's actually even trained games athletes in running as well. So, you know, Matt's got it all. So, Matt, I'm really appreciative for you to be out here with us and doing this. So what we want to do is we want to share, first what we want to do is we want to go through some strategies that people can utilize for running. There's 4 strategies that Matt's come up with, and I think that are very powerful that can make you a better runner. Also, we're going to give two training programs, one for the person who wants to do an endurance race. We're going to be talking specifically about a half marathon, and you can always tweak it based on what you want to do. And then the other one we're going to do is we're going to talk if you're a CrossFit athlete and what your goal is to become a better runner. We're going to give you some strategy you can utilize as well. So let's go into those 4 strategies that you talked about what can people do to become better runners. Okay?
Well, I think the first thing, and not that this is bad information or something that you shouldn't be thinking about, but I think what people default to is immediately their form from hips down. A lot of people talk about, you know, the 0 drop shoes and are they heel striking? Again, good things to think about, but it's not where I begin my advice. So the first place I begin my advice is kind of what I see when I'm just driving around Atlanta and I watch people running down the street. And the first thing that I usually notice is that people imagine that their arms are somehow creating momentum when they're going across their body. And I think if you do it in a way like this, and you almost look like 80s aerobics, right? You can realize how ridiculous this is, because actually what you're doing is side to side.
They're wasting energy, essentially.
They're wasting energy, exactly. So one of the first things I ask people to do is, instead of this, can you drop and start moving everything forward, right? Okay. Now the next thing I'll see people do, and I'll just show you right here, Austin, is immediately, and you'll see this in CrossFit gyms a lot, or where someone will say, today the workout of the day is going to have some running involved, and you can see in their head they'll start stewing over the fact that they hate running, and shoulders will go up, they'll get tense. Next thing you'll know, lower back gets tense, maybe they go back, their breathing starts becoming more labored. So you can see it when you're looking at someone from the side or from behind. All of this becomes tight in the upper back all the way down to the lower back. It just becomes stressed out, right?
This is even biomechanical. We see this as well as, you know, people who are hunched over, you can't breathe in more oxygen.
Exactly.
So when you're upright, you know, you can take in a lot more oxygen than if you're hunched over like this. So, you know, this is obviously a key point right now for people.
And I think on that point, this would be my third tip about running, and the one that I work even with some of my games athletes and that I've run with, and some of the big competitors who are great inside the gym but maybe not as natural to the running, is just breathing. And I think that people imagine the more labored the breathing, the more intensity is up, and the more they're gonna run fast. Now, contrast that with any Olympian you've ever seen. We talked earlier about the world record holder for the half mile out of Kenya. If you just watch on the TV screen when he's running, you can't tell if he's meditating, if he's just sitting in a chair, or if he's in fact running at a manic speed, right? So what I tell people is relax your breathing, relax your breathing. And what people will default to is every step, that's when their breath begins. So they'll run hard and instead, reset in your head. You say to yourself, reset. I said, reset. Breathe, right?
So it's like if you control this, then everything else will take its place?
Everything goes with it, right?
Perfect.
So those would be the 3. Are you moving across your body? Are you tight up in here because you don't love the idea of running? And what's your breathing doing? So that would be my first 3, and I'd say that that's kind of ubiquitous in terms of what I see across skill level, and it's where I begin before I even start thinking about hips down. Yeah. But on hips down, and this would be my last bit of advice, people are always very, very worried about heel striking, and they imagine that heel striking begins where they place their foot, right? So people imagine that heel striking begins on the placement of foot. So am I too far back? Should I be more forward? But the reality is most heel striking begins on how you're picking your foot off the ground. What I mean by that is if you go to Google Images and you were to look at Michael Johnson, you will see that every time he's in a freeze frame, he's almost a perfect 4. And the reason is his hamstring is doing all the work to bring the foot off the ground. So hamstring is working here, and so when he's up, this is him being up. He's pulling through, and when he lands perfectly over himself. His knee is not in front of his foot, and then he is up, pulling his foot off the ground, coming through. Now, the contrast that is when you're not pulling with your hamstring, your hip flexor is almost as if you have like a broken leg, and your hip flexor is doing all the work. When that begins is when the heel striking begins. So my last bit of advice would be, how are you bringing your foot off the ground? And what I say when I'm working with people on their running is, imagine yourself a marionette puppet. So if it, again, I'll show on you, you would think that your wrists are going to have a string that's just imaginary, going to go right into the bottom of the quad, top of the knee, and that you're going to think you have a string right from the bottom of your butt into your heel. And so what you want is, when you go up, that string is working like this, and it is working in the exact same way you're pulling, correct?
Yep.
So this is your arms going forward all the time, and this is your foot coming off the ground. So those would be my four
strategies.
Yeah.
And then let's talk about different protocols and training protocols.
Yeah.
So someone wants to do a half marathon.
Yeah.
And I say this to everyone because, you know, I've done a few marathons before, training for an Ironman right now, and you never really think what's possible until you start training for it and you see what is possible. And I see people who do marathons, when I talk to them a year before that race, I mean, they were like almost 300 pounds, could barely walk, couldn't get off the couch, but they committed to something, created some discipline habits, and then they were able to complete what they thought was the impossible. And so they set these expectations themselves and these limitations, and they were able to break through that. So, you know, if you're hearing this right now, you're saying, oh, I can never do a half marathon.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I have both seen people who you would never even imagine could do these races. So, you know, the 4, maybe you want to start with a 5K, 10K, half marathon, then you complete the marathon. But we're going to talk just specifically on the half marathon for some training protocols. Then we'll talk about the CrossFit athlete. So let's go with the let's start with the half marathon and what people could do for some training.
Yeah.
What would be a good 1 week, like weekly training protocol?
Yeah, for a half marathon, I think for any race, the question you're going to have to ask yourself is, what's my long run? So for a half marathon, the answer to that is never going to be the total of that distance. So it's never going to be that full 13 plus. But what I would say for a half marathon is, your long run is going to be that 10 miles, that 10-mile mark. So in your head, you're going to have that your long run is going to be 10 miles on, say, a Sunday. Now, to back into that, quite literally, we have
literally backing
back into us. To back into that, I would cut that in half for your short runs. So now you know your short runs are going to be 5 miles. And when you set up your week, you're going to have 2 short, 1 long. So that's 3 days of running of 5 miles, and your long run is going to be 10. Now, what are you going to do on those 5-mile days? You're going to go to about what I would call 75 to 80% of your threshold at that distance. So what that means is, an all-out 5-mile looks like X time. When you do your short runs, you need to be getting close to that, and by close I mean 75 to 80% of that all-out effort for that distance.
Okay.
You can skin that cat in a few different ways. You can do it as what's called a fartlek run, which means you go sort of at tempo and you back it down, and at tempo and back it down with a mile warm up and a mile sort of warm down.
And if you're training for this, by the way, so when he's giving you these numbers, there's a couple numbers you should know before you even get started with this.
Yeah.
The 400-meter run we talked about, you should know what your 400-meter PR is, 800-meter PR, 1-mile PR, and your 2-mile PR. So if you have those PRs down, then what you're able to do is you're able to do these 75 to 80% runs.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So let's say, you know, most people I would guess they're going to be probably doing, let's say they do a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday routine, right?
Okay, yeah.
So Monday, because Saturday is always going to be the 10-miler like you're talking about, right? So Monday is what? Is it the 5-mile?
Yeah, so Monday you'd go 5, and you want to get to that 80% threshold at that distance and have a little fun with it. Maybe you do some tempo inside of it. Then I would actually say, don't do that back to back. I like to say the 4th day is what I call the curveball day. It's going to be a little longer distance, and one of the programs we talked about earlier is, let's say on that day you do 7 miles total. And one way to do that 7 miles would be you do a mile warm up, nice and easy, a mile warm down, nice and easy. Now you have 5 miles to get done. And like you talked about, if you know what your 800 PR is, if you know what your mile PR is, what I would suggest for that 5 miles, you take your PR in the mile. So let's just say someone has a 6-minute mile, and you do 10 by 800, 10 by half mile at that pace. So that would be a 3-minute half mile. Now your rest in between, your maximum rest is going to be about 2 minutes. Your minimum rest is going to be about 45 seconds. So you're going to try to go out in your first 3 repetitions, 2-minute rest. Your next 3 repetitions, if you're feeling good, 1.5 minutes. At the end of the workout, if you can get into that 45-second time domain for recovery and do the whole workout at 45 seconds, you know you're getting pretty close to race ready.
So Monday, 5 mile. Let's say Tuesday is the 7 mile, like we're talking about. So you do
Wednesday,
1 mile run, then you do you take your
mile PR.
1 mile PR, you do half mile, and then you take a 2-minute rest. If that was easy for you, then the next half mile you only take 1.5 minutes. And then if it was easy for you, then you do about maybe 1:15. You do 75 seconds, then down to 1 minute. The goal, like he was saying though, is to get down to 45 seconds though of a rest period before your next half mile, and then you of course close out with that 1 mile cool down. And then a couple days after that, 5 miler, Saturday, Sunday, that's going to be the long run, right?
Exactly.
So you're never doing, like, one of the biggest misconceptions is these people think when they do a half marathon or a marathon, they have to do the total distance before the actual race.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, 10 miles for a half marathon is even pushing the higher limit of how far you have to go. You could go 8, 9 and be fine. Mentally, you probably want to go at least 8, 9, so that 13 number doesn't feel too daunting on race day, but yeah.
And I want to share, I mean, you know, we're talking a lot about this half marathon, and I've got to say, these marathons I've done, and I've done a half Ironman, and, you know, there's no greater feeling, I feel like, than crossing that finish line and knowing, like, what you've accomplished that very few people in the world will ever accomplish. So, I mean, if this is something you're watching and you're really considering doing this, I highly recommend it. That finish line, when you cross it, I cannot tell you the feeling that you get when I mean, you're just like in a euphoric state of how great it is. So, and then let's talk about for CrossFit athletes, because there's a lot of CrossFitters who are going to be watching this. That's probably most of the people that will be watching this. So what would be a good, because we're doing about 5 days of a week in the gym, right? And it's a lot of lifting and there's a lot of gymnastics. So, but now we're seeing a lot of running show up in a lot of the workouts. So give us like a recommendation on how can people start implementing this.
Yeah, I mean, like you talked about earlier, the first thing you need to know is you need to know your PRs. In the same way that you can say, here's what I deadlift, here's what my back squat is, here's my snatch from the high hang, my snatch off the floor. You need to know your 4, you need to know your 8, your quarter mile, your half mile. You need to know your mile time, and it's not going to hurt you to know what an all-out 2 mile looks like for you. From that position, I'd say a great run that we do here at CrossFit Terminus is 8 or even 10 by 400 meters. And you're going to go every 3 minutes. So the quicker you can get that done, the more rest you get. For me, that looks like I'm coming through in about 122 to 125, and I've got a full 1.5 minutes plus, and then I can turn around that same time again. From there, you're going to have to think, how often am I doing a workout like Jerry? A Jerry, which is, of course, a 1 mile run, 2K row, 1 mile run. Some of the hero WODs have longer endurance components to them. I would never suggest you do Murph once a week or something like that. However, on top of those 400 repeats or a mile for time, a mile at your all-out pace, which should be happening probably at least every other week. A good resource for some of this to direct you in the right direction is the CrossFit Endurance webpage that has sort of creative ideas around this. But in between sort of those higher repetition 400 meters and in between doing like a mile for speed, how often are you doing a Jerry? Can you do a Jerry-like workout and be doing those things 2-3 times a week on top of your workout of the days? If you're doing that, you'll notice that a year down the road, your running times are coming down. If you want to be a games athlete and you're not going to die during a 3-mile run when, you know, Castro programs it, you're going to be in a better spot.
And a lot of the workouts we saw this year, I mean, there was like 4 or 5 different workouts that all had running in them. You know, with the 400, 200, if you failed on the muscle ups, the 3-mile run. I mean, so there's a lot of running that's starting to get implemented into these workouts. So Matt, I appreciate you doing this, man. That was awesome. We're going to post the document down below so you can see some of the highlights from this. We'll also post a video of the Kenyan guy, right, who he did the 800 meter. So we'll post a video of that so you can start to see his biomechanics and his breathing patterns and what he did. All right. So thanks again for watching, and stay tuned for next month's movement of the month. Sorry. I'm interested to see how this sounded.